The golden bells of Westminster Abbey rang loud and proud. But it wasn't just the king's coronation that caught the world's attention. It was the arrival of a family whose grace, charm, and quiet strength turned tradition into something truly unforgettable. Prince William, Princess Kate, and their young children stepped into history. They weren't just part of a royal ceremony, they were writing the next chapter of a modern monarchy together. It was a calm and beautiful morning in London. The streets outside were quiet for now, but a sense of excitement was already filling the air. People across the city were getting ready for one of the biggest royal events in recent history, the coronation of the new king. All eyes were on Westminster Abbey, where history would be made once again. But far away from the cameras and the grand decorations. In the peaceful halls of Kensington Palace, another kind of preparation was taking place. Inside the palace, Prince William and Princess Kate were already awake. They had a big day ahead, and so did their children Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. While millions of people were preparing to watch the ceremony on television, this family was getting ready to be part of it. The house was quiet at first, but soon the soft sound of footsteps and whispers filled the rooms. Kate walked gently into her children's rooms, opening curtains and letting in the morning light. She smiled as she saw her daughter Charlotte rubbing her eyes and sitting up in bed, while little Louis stretched and yawned in his room down the hall. Prince George, now a little older, was already half awake. He knew today was not just any day. He had a special role to play in the ceremony, and he wanted to do it well. William joined them in the breakfast room, where the table was already set with toast, fruits, eggs, and tea. The children came down, still in their pajamas, but full of questions. Louis asked why there would be horses and soldiers outside. Charlotte wanted to know what kind of music would be played. George, being the eldest, stayed quiet but looked thoughtful. William answered each question with patience, smiling as he saw how curious and excited they all were. Kate made sure the children ate something healthy, reminding them gently to eat slowly and not spill anything on their clothes today, especially. They had to stay neat. The staff at the palace helped bring in their ceremonial outfits. They were carefully arranged and pressed, hanging on polished wooden stands, ready for the children to wear. Everything had been chosen with great care. A button, ribbon, an accessory had a meaning. It was more than just clothing. It was tradition. Upstairs, a team of stylists and dressers arrived to help with hair and clothing. Kate guided Charlotte to her room and sat beside her as her hair was gently brushed and braided. Charlotte sat very still, looking at herself in the mirror, and every now and then she turned her head to ask her mother how she looked. Kate, with her usual warmth, reassured her that she looked like a true little princess. Then she reminded her gently, "But what matters more than how you look, Charlotte, is how kind and calm you are. Remember to smile, sit straight, and listen." Carefully today, meanwhile, William was helping George with his special robe. He showed him how to wear it properly and explained its importance. George looked up at his father with admiration. It wasn't every day that a young boy was part of such a historic moment. William could see that his son was a little nervous, but he placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "You're ready. Just be yourself and do your best. That's all anyone can ask." Little Louis was a different story. He was excited, yes, but in his own playful way. He ran around the room a little, laughing and pretending to be a royal soldier. The staff smiled, and even Kate couldn't help but laugh as she tried to keep him still long enough to help him into his outfit. Eventually, she knelt beside him, straightened his collar, and kissed his cheek. "You're going to be the star of the show, my little one," she whispered. By mid-morning, everything was nearly in place. The family stood together in front of a large mirror. They looked like a royal painting, composed and united. But behind the beauty was something more important, a deep bond of love, support, and understanding. They weren't just dressing for the cameras. They were preparing to represent their country, their family, and a history that stretched back hundreds of years. As the final touches were made, Kate went to check on each child once again. She made sure Charlotte's shoes were tied just right, helped George adjust the small golden pin on his shoulder, and gently wiped a small mark from Louis's chin. Then she turned to William, who smiled at her with quiet pride. They had done this together not just today, but every day. They had raised their children not only to be royal, but to be kind, grounded, and confident. There was a soft knock at the door. A royal aide stepped in and said politely, "Your carriages will be ready in 10 minutes." It was time. The family gathered in the grand hall where portraits of past monarchs watched silently from the walls. The children looked up at the paintings, perhaps wondering if they too would one day be remembered in history, before stepping out. Kate crouched down and gathered her children for one last moment. "Remember," she said, "this is a special day for our country. But more than that, it's a day to be proud of who we are, to be polite, and to be kind to everyone we meet." The children nodded, each in their own way, understanding the meaning of her words. As they walked toward the palace steps, the noise of distant crowds could be heard. Cameras were waiting, flashes ready to go off. But in this small private moment, there was a stillness. William took Kate's hand for a brief second. No words were needed. Their eyes met, and in that look was years of partnership, understanding, and shared responsibility. They stepped outside into the bright morning sun. The car stood ready, polished and gleaming. Guards stood at attention. The streets beyond the gates were lined with well-wishers, waving flags, cheering with joy and excitement. As the family stepped into the car, the crowd roared with applause. The doors closed softly, and the royal motorcade began to move. Inside the car, the atmosphere was calm but full of energy. Louis sat by the window, pointing and laughing as he saw the horses and the waving flags. Charlotte held her mother's hand and looked quietly at the people outside. George sat beside his father, holding a small booklet that explained the ceremony. William gently spoke to him, pointing out key parts and reminding him when his moment would come. Kate looked at her children, her eyes soft and proud. She thought about how quickly they were growing up. Just yesterday it seemed like they were taking their first steps, and today they were part of history. She glanced at William and knew he was thinking the same thing. The journey to Westminster Abbey was not long, but it felt meaningful. As they drove through the city, they passed streets filled with people of all ages, races, backgrounds, all united by a love for tradition and a hope for the future. Flags waved in every direction, and faces lit up as the royal family came into view. As they neared the abbey, the ancient towers of the church came into sight. It stood tall and proud, a symbol of centuries of royal ceremonies. The bells rang, loudly welcoming guests from around the world. Inside, leaders, dignitaries, and royals from every corner of the globe were already seated. Waiting for the moment to begin, the car slowed to a gentle stop. The doors opened, and out stepped the family one by one. First William, tall and composed, then Kate, elegant and graceful. George followed, looking brave. Charlotte walked with perfect posture, and Louis held his sister's hand, his eyes wide with wonder. The cameras clicked. The crowd cheered. And history watched as the next generation of royals walked up the stone steps of Westminster Abbey, dressed not just in royal robes, but in the love and lessons of their parents, and ready to take part in a moment the world would never forget. The royal car slowly moved through the heart of London, its windows tinted but still allowing people to catch glimpses of the family inside. As the wheels rolled over the smooth black road, a special energy filled the air. Crowds had been waiting for hours, some overnight, just for this moment. They were standing behind strong metal barriers, waving flags, holding up homemade signs, and cheering loudly every time a royal vehicle passed by. People of all ages had come together, some wearing paper crowns, others dressed in the colors of the Union Jack, all eager to be part of history. Inside the car, it was a mix of calm and excitement. Prince William sat beside Prince George, occasionally looking out the window and nodding at the guards lining the streets. George followed his father's gaze, watching the people cheer and wave with wide smiles. Although George had seen crowds before, today felt different. He could feel the weight of the day, the importance of the event. He sat straight, dressed in his formal attire, trying to remember everything his parents had told him earlier in the morning. Next to them, Princess Kate sat gracefully with Charlotte on one side and little Louis on the other. She softly held Charlotte's hand, occasionally leaning down to whisper something in her ear. Charlotte nodded seriously, her eyes wide but focused. Even at her young age, she understood how important this day was. She wasn't just there to look pretty, she was part of a legacy. Family that had carried the hopes and dreams of a nation for generations. Louis, on the other hand, was filled with childlike curiosity. His eyes never stopped moving, jumping from the horses outside to the flags in the crowd, and then to the gold details inside the royal car. Every now and then he leaned closer to the window and pointed at something exciting. "Look, a marching band," he said loudly, his voice full of wonder. Kate smiled at him, gently reminding him to use his inside voice. Louis nodded, then whispered, "They're wearing shiny hats." Everyone in the car chuckled quietly. Even on a day so formal and grand. Louis's innocence brought a moment of lightness. The route to Westminster Abbey had been carefully planned. The car would pass through some of the most historic parts of London, past Buckingham Palace, through the grand avenue known as the Mall, and finally arriving at the famous Abbey where coronations had taken place for nearly 1,000 years. Soldiers in shining uniforms stood tall and proud, lining both sides of the road. Their boots were polished, their movements timed perfectly. As the royal car passed, they saluted in perfect unison. Bands played traditional British music, filling the streets with rhythm and pride. From inside the car, the children could hear the sound of drums and trumpets. It made their hearts beat faster. Kate gently squeezed Charlotte's hand as if to say, "This is it. We're almost there." William leaned over to George and reminded him when he would need to step out and where he would stand. George nodded, trying to appear calm, though his fingers fidgeted a little in his lap. He was nervous, but also proud. As the car turned the final corner before the Abbey, the view changed. The street opened up to a large square, filled with more crowds, more flags, and more flashing cameras. But standing tall in the middle of it all was Westminster Abbey itself, a beautiful, ancient building with tall towers, stained glass windows, and walls that held centuries of secrets. George stared at it in awe. It looked like a castle out of a storybook. But it was real, and he was about to walk through its doors. The car rolled to a gentle stop. There was a pause. The door closest to William opened first. A royal aide stood, waiting, offering a respectful bow. William stepped out calmly, standing tall in his ceremonial uniform. The sound of the crowd rose to a cheer the moment he appeared. Photographers clicked rapidly. William turned and offered his hand to George, who stepped out slowly and carefully, remembering to keep his posture straight. He followed his father closely. On the other side of the car, the door opened for Kate. She stepped out with elegance, her outfit perfectly styled, her smile warm but composed. The cameras loved her. She reached back into the car, first helping Charlotte step out. The little princess moved with grace, her dress flowing gently as she walked beside her mother. Then came Louis, the youngest of the group, who blinked at the sudden brightness, but smiled confidently as he took his mother's hand. Together, the family stood outside the car for a brief moment, letting the world see them. It was a powerful image to future kings, a future queen, and their children who would carry on the story of the British monarchy. They began to walk slowly toward the steps of the Abbey, the guards and aides guiding them gently. The children were perfectly behaved. George walked proudly. Charlotte looked ahead with quiet strength. Louis skipped a little at first, but quickly remembered to slow down. As they reached the steps, the huge wooden doors of Westminster Abbey opened slowly and dramatically. Inside came the echo of choir voices and the soft sound of organ music. Light from the stained glass windows danced across the stone floor. William and Kate led their children inside, walking past rows of important guests already seated. Heads turned as the royal family made their entrance. Some people whispered compliments, others simply watched in admiration. Inside, now the atmosphere was completely different from the noisy streets. It was quiet, grand, and full of history. The Abbey smelled faintly of old wood, flowers, and polished stone. Everywhere the children looked, There were paintings, statues, and colorful banners. George's eyes moved to the high ceilings, amazed at how tall and beautiful the building was. Charlotte looked at the long red carpet under their feet, wondering how many queens and kings had walked this very path. Louis, still holding his mother's hand, asked in a small voice, "Is this where the crown is?" Kate nodded gently, smiling. "Yes, this is where it all happens." They were guided to their seats by royal ushers. George had a different place, a little closer to the front, since he would take part in the ceremony as one of the pages. He looked back once at his father, who gave him a tiny nod of encouragement. George sat up straighter and folded his hands neatly. Charlotte sat beside her mother and quietly folded her dress so it wouldn't wrinkle, looked around at all the guests' royalty from other countries, presidents, prime ministers, and important religious leaders. It was like being in a room full of people from a history book. Yet she didn't look scared. She looked thoughtful, mature beyond her years. Louis, being younger, had a little more trouble sitting still. He tapped his feet softly, played with the edge of his sleeve, and looked around with wide eyes. But Kate leaned over every few minutes to whisper calming words to him. She also handed him a small, folded paper with drawings on it, simple explanations of the ceremony, made just for him. He smiled, thankful for something to focus on. As the choir sang and the organ played, the ceremony slowly began. More royals entered. The guests stood respectfully. The new king arrived in full regalia, ready to be crowned. Cameras captured every moment, and the world watched from every corner. But in the middle of all this, the royal family sat quietly, their faces calm and respectful. They were not the center of today's event, but their presence was deeply felt. They were the future looking upon the past. William occasionally glanced at his children. Every time he saw them sitting straight, listening carefully, and behaving with such grace, he felt a deep sense of pride. These were not just royal children, they were young people learning about duty, respect, and tradition. Kate, too, looked at them with soft eyes. She remembered when they were babies, when their world was much smaller. Now they were sitting among the most powerful and important people in the world, learning to carry the expectations that came with their names. Outside, the crowds continued to cheer, though from far away it sounded more like a soft hum. Inside the abbey, the service continued. The archbishop spoke. The king gave his oaths. The crown, heavy with jewels, was placed carefully upon his head. Trumpets rang out. Everyone stood and applauded. It was a moment that would go down in history, and among the many faces in that ancient church, the cameras often returned to one family that had arrived not just in style, but with unity, calmness, and love. Their children had shown the world what the future of royalty could look like: graceful, grounded, and full of promise. As the ceremony continued, Prince George stood when it was his turn to assist. He walked forward bravely, holding the king's robe, as he had practiced many times. He did not trip. He did not hesitate. He performed his part perfectly, and when he returned to his seat, his parents smiled at him with pride. The world had seen a family, not just a royal unit. A mother and father guiding their children with care, and children doing their best to understand and honor the moment. They hadn't just arrived at Westminster Abbey, they had made an unforgettable entrance into history. Inside Westminster Abbey, everything felt quiet, but filled with meaning. It was a place of history, full of memories and important events. The walls of the church had seen hundreds of years of kings and queens, weddings, funerals, and coronations. The tall windows let colored light fall on the stone floors. The sound of the choir singing echoed gently through the space. Everyone inside was dressed in their best clothes, sitting with straight backs, showing respect for the moment. Important guests from around the world had come: royalty, presidents, and leaders from different countries. But the eyes of many were on the family that would someday lead the monarchy: Prince William, Princess Kate, and their 3 children. Prince William sat in silence, watching the ceremony unfold in front of him. His face was calm, but his mind was full. He had grown up attending these kinds of royal events, but this one was different. This was his father's big day. After years of waiting, his father was becoming king. William knew how much that meant. also knew that one day the same moment would come for him. That thought sat quietly in the back of his mind, but he didn't let it distract him. Right now, he was focused on the present and supporting his father. Being a proud son and showing his children what duty and respect looked like, Princess Kate sat next to him, holding her head high, her eyes gentle and focused. Her dress was elegant but not flashy, her posture straight, and her presence calm. She looked around the abbey, taking in everything: the music, the gold decorations, the flags, the people, but most of all, her eyes often turned toward her children. As a mother, she couldn't help but keep checking on them. She wanted them to be comfortable, to feel safe, and to understand the beauty of the moment without being overwhelmed. Prince George was sitting closer to the front. He wasn't just attending the coronation, he was part of it. Dressed in a red ceremonial uniform with gold buttons and white gloves, he looked older than his age. He sat quietly, but his fingers moved slightly in his lap. He was thinking about what he had to do. George had been chosen to help carry the king's robe during part of the ceremony. It was a big task for someone so young, and he wanted to do it right. He had practiced many times before, but now that the real moment was almost here, he felt nervous and excited at the same time. He looked toward his father once, and Prince William gave him a short nod. It was a silent message that said, "You've got this, I believe in you." Behind him, Princess Charlotte sat beside her mother, looking beautiful and calm. Her dress was neat, her shoes polished, and her long hair tied back with care. Charlotte was known for her maturity, and today was no different. She sat still, her hands folded, watching everything with quiet curiosity. When the choir sang, she listened carefully. When the Archbishop spoke, she leaned forward just a little, trying to understand the words. But sometimes Kate would lean down and whisper something in her ear, and Charlotte would smile or nod. She was still a child, but she carried herself like a little lady. Prince Louis, the youngest, sat beside Charlotte. At just 5 years old, he was doing his best to behave. At the beginning, he sat quietly, watching with big, curious eyes. Looked up at the ceiling, amazed by how high it was. He looked at the stained glass windows and whispered to his sister, "They look like a rainbow." Charlotte nodded, but put a finger to her lips, reminding him to be quiet. Louis giggled softly, then went back to sitting still. But being still for so long is hard for any young child, especially during such a long and serious ceremony. After a while, Louis began to move in his seat. He crossed and uncrossed his legs, played with his sleeve, and whispered more questions to Charlotte. Kate leaned over and gave him a soft smile, then handed him a small booklet made just for him. It had pictures and drawings that explained the coronation in a simple and fun way. Louis opened it happily and began to flip through the pages, pointing at the drawings of the crown and the soldiers. Suddenly, a royal usher came forward and gave Prince George a small nod. It was time. George stood up slowly and walked forward toward the king. The long red robe of the king was placed gently into his hands. It was heavy, but George had trained for this. He gripped it carefully, walking in rhythm with the ceremony. Everyone in the abbey watched as he walked across the floor, following behind the king, making sure the robe didn't drag too much or tangle. He kept his back straight, his head held high, just like he had practiced. The camera zoomed in, capturing the moment for the world to see. George looked strong and brave, a true young prince. Prince William and Princess Kate both watched their son closely. William felt proud and emotional. He had once stood in a church like this as a young boy, attending his own parents' ceremonies. Now it was his turn to guide the next generation. Kate's eyes followed George carefully. She wasn't just watching. A prince at work, she was watching her little boy grow up in front of millions. When George returned to his seat, she gave him a soft look that said, "Well done." As the ceremony continued, the Archbishop lifted the crown. The entire abbey went quiet. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Slowly, carefully, the crown was placed on the king's head. Trumpets rang out loudly, echoing through the great church. The choir began to sing again, their voices rising in beautiful harmony. The music filled the air with a sense of joy and power. Everyone in the abbey stood. The world was watching. A new king had been crowned. Louis clapped his hands once before remembering he was supposed to be quiet. Kate gently patted his hand and whispered, "Let's clap later." Louis nodded and smiled. Charlotte stood tall beside her mother, watching. With deep respect, George sat proudly, knowing he had been part of something that would be remembered for generations. The ceremony continued with more prayers, songs, and words of blessing. The king gave a short speech, promising to serve the people with honor and care. Then it was Prince William's turn to walk forward. He stepped toward his father, then knelt down. In a strong but gentle voice, he swore loyalty to the new king. It was a powerful moment, one king accepting the crown, and another king waiting, showing his support. The cameras captured their faces as they looked at each other, father and son, understanding the deep meaning of what had just happened. Kate watched quietly, feeling a rush of emotion. She had seen her husband grow from a young boy to a man, from a prince to a future king, and now she saw him make a promise to his father in front of the world. She knew how much pressure came with that promise, but she also knew that William had the strength and the heart to carry it. As the final prayer was said, and the last note of music faded, the ceremony began to come to an end. The archbishop raised his hands and blessed the royal family, the choir sang a final hymn, and the guests slowly stood again. Then, one by one, the royals began to leave their seats and form a line. The king and queen were first, followed by other members of the royal family. William stood up and gently took Kate's hand. The children stood too. George stood tall and confident. Charlotte smoothed her dress and fixed her hair. Louis wiggled a little, happy that the long sitting part was over. The family began to walk down the long red carpet, heading toward the exit of the abbey. As they walked, people in the rows turned to look at them. Some smiled, others gave a respectful nod. The camera lights flashed again. Outside, the cheering of the crowd grew louder and louder. The bells of the abbey rang in. Celebration. The sun shone brightly, and flags waved high in the air. When the royal family stepped outside, the world greeted them with joy. The moment was complete. A new king had been crowned, and his family had been there with him, not just to watch, but to play a part, to represent the future, and to show the world that tradition could still feel alive as they climbed into the royal carriage. Kate looked at her children one more time. She smiled softly. They had done well. They had been strong, respectful, and brave. As the carriage began to roll forward, waving crowds followed them with their eyes. George leaned over and asked, "Did I do okay?" William placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You did more than okay. You made us proud." Charlotte smiled quietly, and Louis waved one last time at the people before turning to look out the window. And just like that, they moved forward, not just through the streets of London, but through time itself, as a new generation of royals ready to carry the story forward. After the coronation ceremony, the royal family stepped out of Westminster Abbey into the bright sunlight, and the warm cheers of the crowd gathered outside. The atmosphere was electric with excitement. Thousands of people had come to witness this historic day, and their faces were full of joy and pride. Flags waved everywhere, some held by children on their parents' shoulders. Some hung from buildings, and some fluttering from nearby trees. The air was filled with the sounds of clapping, singing, and the occasional shout of "Long live the King." Prince William, Princess Kate, and their children stood together on the steps of the abbey for a moment, allowing the public and the cameras to capture their happy faces. They smiled and waved, looking calm and dignified. But behind those smiles were feelings of relief, excitement, and a deep sense of honor. This was a moment they had all been preparing for, and now it was happening right in front of them. Prince George, still wearing his red uniform from the ceremony, looked around with wide eyes. To him, everything was so big and amazing. The crowds, the noise, the bright cameras, and the magnificent buildings. This was not just a regular day for a little boy. This was a day of history. He felt proud, but also a bit overwhelmed. His mother Kate noticed this, and bent down to whisper softly, "You're doing so well, George. Everyone is so proud of you." George nodded, squeezing her hand for comfort and strength. Princess Charlotte stood beside her mother, her face calm but glowing with happiness. She too was trying to take it all in: the faces, the flags, the music. Louis, on the other hand, was a bit more restless, but Kate kept him close and distracted him with small smiles and quiet words. He waved at the crowd from time to time, sending little bursts of energy into the otherwise serious event. Soon, the royal family moved toward the waiting royal carriage. The carriage was beautiful, shining with gold and decorated with royal symbols. It looked like something from a fairy tale, and the children's eyes sparkled with excitement when they saw it. As they climbed in, the carriage slowly started to move through the streets of London. The streets were lined with thousands of people, all standing shoulder to shoulder. Many had come early in the morning and had waited for hours to see the royal procession. Some held homemade signs, others wore hats with crowns or red, white, and blue colors. Everyone wanted to be part of this special day. The children noticed the crowds, and George asked his father, "How many people do you think are out here?" William smiled and replied, "More than we can count, George. It's all of them here to celebrate with us." As the carriage moved along, the sound of cheers and applause never stopped. People shouted words of encouragement and joy. From time to time, military bands marched alongside the carriage, playing lively and traditional music that filled the streets with energy. The soldiers wore bright red uniforms, shining helmets, and polished boots. Their steps were perfectly timed. Their presence added a sense of grandeur to the celebration. Kate looked at William and saw the mixture of pride and responsibility on his face. This moment was more than a parade. It was a reminder of the commitment they had made not just to the crown, but to the people of the United Kingdom and the world. It was a promise to serve with honor, kindness, and strength. As the carriage passed famous landmarks, the crowd's cheers grew louder. They passed Big Ben, its clock tower standing tall and proud. They went by the Houses of Parliament, where decisions that shaped the country were made. They rode past beautiful parks and historic buildings. Every place had stories of the past, just like Westminster Abbey. And now they were part of a new story unfolding. The children watched the city go by, feeling the excitement, but also learning about their place in it. George pointed out a red double-decker bus and asked, "Do you think people on that bus can see us?" Charlotte smiled and said, "Maybe, but they probably have to stand still to watch." Louis laughed softly, clutching Kate's hand as the carriage turned a corner at one point. The carriage stopped briefly to let a group of veterans and soldiers salute the king and his family. The veterans wore medals on their jackets and held their hats over their hearts. They looked at the king with respect and admiration. William nodded deeply, knowing that these men and women had served the country bravely. Kate also bowed her head slightly, grateful for their sacrifices. The crowd joined in a moment of silence for those who had given their lives for their country. Even the children understood the importance of this quiet moment. George stood a little straighter. Charlotte held her mother's hand tightly. As the procession continued, there was a sense of unity and celebration everywhere. People from all walks of life had come together to witness this event. Were old people smiling with tears in their eyes, young children laughing and waving flags, tourists from different countries taking photos, and local families sharing the joy with one another. This day was about more than just a royal family. It was about a nation coming together to honor tradition, history, and hope for the future. After some time, the carriage reached Buckingham Palace, the home of the royal family. The palace looked grand against the clear blue sky. The famous balcony where the royal family often appears to wave to the public was decorated with flowers and banners. The children's eyes grew wide with wonder as the carriage pulled up to the palace gates. As they stepped out of the carriage, the crowd erupted in applause again. Soldiers in full ceremonial dress stood at attention along the palace grounds. The family walked slowly toward the grand front doors, waving and smiling. William held Kate's hand tightly, and the children followed closely behind. Inside Buckingham Palace, there was a quiet celebration. Close friends, family members, and Important guests waited to greet the king and his family. There were hugs, warm words, and smiles everywhere. The children were shown to a special room where they could relax after the long day. George proudly showed off the king's robe he had helped carry. Charlotte talked about the beautiful music she had heard in the abbey. Louis, still full of energy, was given a small royal toy to play with, which kept him happily busy. Kate and William took a moment to step away from the crowd and look out of a window toward the gardens. They held hands and shared a quiet conversation. They both felt the weight of the day, of the excitement, the relief, and the promise of the future. William said, "This is just the beginning. There's so much to do, but we'll do it together." Kate smiled warmly, knowing that no matter what challenges came, their family would stand strong. As evening fell, the celebrations continued outside. Fireworks lit up the sky in a dazzling display of colors. People gathered in parks and public squares to watch the show. Music played, and there was laughter and singing everywhere. The coronation day had brought the country together in a way few moments ever had. For the royal children, it had been a day full of wonder and lessons. They had seen history up close and had played their parts in a story that would be told for years. More than that, they had learned about the importance of duty, family, and love. The next morning, the family woke up to a new day, one filled with hope and promise. They knew that the coronation was not just an event, but the start of a new chapter. They would face the future with courage and kindness, carrying the legacy of those who had come before and building something new for those who would come after. The coronation day had come to an end, but the story of Prince William, Princess Kate, and their children continued in the days and weeks that followed. The excitement of the big event was still fresh in everyone's mind, but now came the time to settle into new roles and responsibilities that the coronation had made official. For the family, it was a moment not just of celebration, but of deep reflection and preparation for the future. After the grandeur of Westminster Abbey and the cheers from the crowds outside, the family returned to Buckingham Palace. The palace itself was buzzing with energy. Staff were busy preparing for upcoming events, making sure everything was perfect for the king and his family. The palace, with its huge rooms, elegant halls, and beautiful gardens, was not just a home, but also the center of the monarchy's work. William and Kate understood that their lives had changed in many ways. The coronation wasn't just a ceremony, it was a symbol of new beginnings. William was now the heir to the throne, with his father officially crowned as king. This meant more public duties, more attention from the world, and more responsibility. But it also meant carrying forward traditions that had lasted for centuries, finding ways to keep them alive in a modern world. For the children, the days after the coronation were both exciting and full of learning. George, Charlotte, and Louis were still young, but they had already begun to understand the importance of their family's role. George, especially, was aware that he would one day be king. That was a lot to think about for an 8-year-old. But he faced it with a mixture of pride and curiosity. Kate and William worked hard to balance their public lives with private moments. They knew their children needed to grow up feeling loved and safe, not just like future royals. So, while they attended important meetings, charity events, and public appearances, they made sure to spend quality time as a family. Whether it was reading bedtime stories, playing games, or taking quiet walks in the palace gardens. These moments helped the children stay grounded. One of the first major duties after the coronation was the official reception hosted by the king. Leaders from many countries, members of the government, and important figures from all walks of life gathered at Buckingham Palace to honor the new reign. William and Kate attended with the children, introducing them to new faces and showing them how to behave with grace and respect. It was a chance for the family to be seen not just as royalty, but as people who cared about the world around them. During this reception, William gave a speech that was warmly received. He spoke about the future of the monarchy, the importance of service, and the need to adapt to a changing society. His words were simple but powerful, showing that he understood the trust placed in him by the people. Kate stood beside him, smiling and supportive, proud of her husband and their shared journey. The children watched from nearby, learning from their parents' example. George listened carefully, Charlotte clapped politely, and Louis, as usual, was full of energy, but trying hard to stay focused. These experiences, while formal, were also part of their education. They were learning the values of leadership, kindness, and responsibility. In the weeks that followed, the royal family continued their busy schedule. They visited hospitals, schools, and community centers. Kate took a special interest in mental health and children's well-being, often speaking about the importance of support and understanding. William, with his experience as a pilot and his work in environmental causes, used his platform to raise awareness about climate change and conservation. The children sometimes joined these visits, depending on the nature of the event. It was important for them to see how their family helped others and to understand the meaning behind the crown and the ceremonies. They met people from all backgrounds, from young children in schools to elderly veterans, and they listened to stories of courage, hope, and resilience. At home, life was a mix of routine and special moments. George went to school, where he was a popular and hardworking student. Charlotte loved her lessons and showed a talent for languages and art. Louis, still young, was discovering the world with wide-eyed wonder. Kate and William did their best to support each child's interests and talents, encouraging them to be themselves while respecting their unique place in history. Despite the busy public schedule, the family valued privacy. They often spent weekends away from the spotlight, enjoying quiet time in their country home or exploring nature. These escapes helped the children feel like normal kids, running through fields, playing with pets, and enjoying simple pleasures like baking or reading together. The royal children also experienced their own small adventures. One memorable day, they visited a local farm where they fed animals and learned about farming life. Kate took many photos, capturing moments of laughter and curiosity. William joined in with playful energy, showing the children how to care for animals and appreciate nature. Through all of this, the family remained close. Kate and William worked as a team, supporting each other through the pressures of royal life. They shared the joys and challenges, always putting their children's happiness first. Their partnership was strong, built on love, trust, and a shared vision for their family and their duties. As time passed, the public grew to admire the family even more. They were seen as a symbol of hope and continuity, blending tradition with modern values. People appreciated how William and Kate handled their roles with grace, humility, and kindness. The children became beloved figures, representing the future of the monarchy. At school, George made friends easily, but understood the importance of discretion. Charlotte was known for her bright smile and polite manners, while Louis was becoming more independent and adventurous each day. They were learning to live in the public eye, but also to cherish their private moments. One important lesson the children learned was about the meaning of service. William and Kate often talked about the responsibilities that came with their titles. They wanted their children to grow up understanding that being royal was not just about privilege, but about helping others and making a positive difference. This idea was reflected in their daily lives, whether visiting a hospital or attending a charity event. The family always emphasized kindness and respect. They listened to people's stories and offered support wherever they could. This approach helped the monarchy stay relevant in a changing world, showing that it was about more than ceremony. It was about real connection. The family also faced challenges, of course. The public's attention could be intense, and every step they took was watched closely. Sometimes the media focused on small mistakes or misunderstandings, but William and Kate handled these moments with calm and patience, always protecting their children and focusing on what mattered most. They taught George, Charlotte, and Louis to be proud of who they were, but also humble and grounded. They encouraged the children to be curious, kind, and brave. The family worked together to create a loving home where everyone felt safe and valued. As the years went by, the children grew more confident. George began taking on more official duties, learning from his father and grandfather. Charlotte developed a strong sense of justice and fairness, often speaking out for causes she believed in. Louis, though the youngest, showed a lively spirit and a big heart. The family story became one of hope and continuity. They represented a new generation of royals, ready to face the future with strength and compassion. The coronation had been just the beginning, a ceremony filled with tradition and history. Now came the real work, living up to those traditions and making a difference every day. Kate and William often reflected on how far they had come. From the excitement of their wedding to the challenges of parenting and royal duties, their journey was full of love and growth. They were proud of their children and hopeful for the future they would build together. Through it all, the family remained close, supporting each other through every step. The story of Prince William, Princess Kate, and their children was one. A family, duty, and hope, a story that inspired millions and promised a bright future for the monarchy and the nation.